Hi, I'm Bill Thielman, co-host of BC Poli Talk.
And I'm Daniel Fontaine. And on this week's show, we have MLA Todd Stone. He's the MLA for Kamloops South Thompson. He also is the opposition critic and deals with things like municipal affairs and housing. And Bill, we have talked a lot about municipal affairs and housing over the last couple of months. I expect that you're going to be asking about strata insurance rates, and as well as COVID and a whole bunch of other things. What's on your agenda for today?
Well, I definitely want to talk to Todd Stone about how the COVID-19 crisis has changed his role as critic for municipal affairs and housing, because you've got, on the one hand, renters who are getting a rental subsidy through the COVID-19 government program. Is it sufficient? There's been calls for it to be changed. And on the municipal side, we have cities like Vancouver, where Mayor Kennedy Stewart has said the city might go broke, asking for more funding. The province and the federal government have not come through so far. So those are both his critic areas. I want to see what he has to say about that.
You know, we have talked about, again, this before, but it is a real delicate balance right now for opposition critics. It's very challenging to criticize anything without getting criticized yourself for making a critical statement. So he's really having to balance, draw a fine line here. But it's so important in our democracy that critics actually still maintain their job and continue to dissect government legislation, look at programs. And we've seen this time and time again over the last 6 to 8 weeks, where opposition parties at various provincial levels, federal levels, have made recommendations to government, and programs have actually improved as a result of it. So I actually think it's critical that the critics remain very active in their roles.
Yeah, I would agree with that, although I have to say that the one glaring example of disharmony and discord that people are not cottoning to at all is the federal scene, where we've seen some real nasty attacks on some public officials who can't really defend themselves in that. So I think the BC Liberals, I'll give them credit. I think they've done a good job of trying to balance that. But as we come through and go into the economic recovery stage of the COVID-19 crisis, which is something else we want to ask Todd Stone about, I think we'll see more sharp differences being defined. And I think maybe the gloves won't completely come off, but we're certainly going to see a lot more combativeness, I think, from the parties in the legislature.
Oh, yeah, I can't imagine. I've lived in this province since 1989, and I cannot imagine an election campaign going into it where everybody is hugging each other and praising each other. I think we're going into the last 16 months before the next election, the campaign starts, and they will pivot, and they're going to have to pivot. The BC Liberals and in fact, the Green Party's they've been absolutely nowhere to be found. I haven't seen a Green Party, anyone in the last 6 to 8 weeks. So, and it is a struggle to get attention when you've got something like a pandemic. But nonetheless, there's an election coming up. And if you're out of sight, you're out of mind, for voters, they're going to need to hear and see you if they're going to vote for you.
Well, let's hear and see from Todd Stone.
Sounds good.
BC Poli Talk thanks Harbour Air for supporting the show. It's through sponsorship and viewer support that we get to produce this show.
Todd Stone, welcome to BC Poli Talks.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Bill.
Well, it's great to have anyone here on the show these days, so we're really happy that you're here, and Daniel's here, I'm here. We're all looking for something to do. Listen, we have a lot of topics to talk about. I wanted to ask you first, though, you're the critic for housing and municipal affairs. How has COVID-19 changed your role as the critic with all the files that you have to look at from there?
Well, I think like all MLAs, we wear multiple hats, and certainly as an opposition critic, I have continued to stay on top of the government's plans and the progress they're making against those plans as related to housing and municipal affairs. So there's a wide range of issues there, whether you're talking about affordable housing, obviously the response from a housing perspective to the COVID pandemic that we're in the middle of has taken somewhat priority. There's lots of issues on the municipal affairs side, property tax deferments and so forth, transit funding in communities. So I've been staying on top of all of that the best that I can. But the other hat that we all wear as MLAs is we're elected first and foremost to represent the people in our respective constituencies. And so while I've been working remote at home here, along with my staff working in their homes, we've been doing first and foremost everything we possibly can to support the people of Kamloops and the surrounding area as they've all been grappling with the challenges of COVID.
Yeah, and just related to that, before I switch over to Daniel, we've had a renter's credit for people who have been thrown out of work, jobless because of the COVID-19 crisis. What's your analysis of the renter's credit and how well it's working, and should it be increased?
Well, first off, let me say that I think we universally all agree that some form of rental assistance was absolutely required. When you have the mass number of people that have been temporarily laid off, in some cases, unfortunately, permanently laid off, when you have the thousands of businesses that have either closed their doors temporarily or have reduced their operations, there was no question that there was going to be a big gap, first on April 1st, rent day then, and now for May 1st, and I think we will see the same issue moving forward. And so I think we're all appreciative that the federal and provincial governments came to the table to support, provide rent relief both residentially and commercially recently. On the residential side, as you ask, I think our main concerns that we're hearing about the temporary rental supplement is the eligibility requirements have left a bunch of people out of the mix, and they're not receiving the credit. There's I think concern around the amount of the credit. It was somewhat watered down. Originally, the expectation was set that the credit would be in the form of a $500 per renter amount, and when it was announced, it turned into $300 if you have no dependents, and $500 if you do have dependents. The amount of time that it's available for, April, May, and June, we're hearing concerns that might not be enough time, that it might need to be extended. And last but not least, I think there's a fair bit of confusion that still is in play as to with some renters as to whether or not they even have to pay rent, and whether the rent will be, if they don't pay it now, will they have to pay it in the future. Let's not forget landlords in this equation. The vast majority of landlords in British Columbia are mom and pops. They're not the big, huge companies that we often immediately think of. They're mom and pops who have one or two units, and those units are often a mortgage helper for them personally, and so they have mortgage obligations to meet as well. So we're monitoring this closely. Landlord BC just came out recently and said, in their opinion, the supplement is not enough. It should be increased to $750 for those who don't have dependents, and $1,000 per month for those who do, and that the eligibility requirements should be broadened. The income test should be thrown out the window, and the benefit should be extended through to the end of August 2020. So again, we're going to monitor this very, very closely as we move forward.
So Todd, these are really interesting times, and Bill and I have been talking about this on the show around how opposition critics who are supposed to criticize government, that's what you're paid to do, or part of your job is to criticize, are finding that they're awfully silent these days. We see everybody kind of hugging and holding hands and working together, which is good. I think that's a good thing that we're actually working together. But how challenging has it been for you as a critic to be able to actually say some of the things you're saying now without the public coming at you and saying, hey, you shouldn't criticize the government, just support them? If you could maybe comment on that, what some of the challenges are when you're a critic in a time when people maybe don't want to hear criticism.
Well, it's a very, very good point, and I want to say as emphatically as I can, I am as proud and as appreciative of the efforts of Dr. Bonnie Henry and her public health team, who have steered us through this pandemic. I have appreciated the efforts of Adrian Dix and his colleagues. And I think there's been a fairly uniform, nonpartisan response to this from all parties in British Columbia. On March 23rd, a scaled down number of MLAs from all parties went into that legislature and unanimously approved an emergency supply bill to get the province through this tough time. That being said, the role of opposition is a critical one, and there is an important element of accountability that needs to continue, not just through the rest of this pandemic, but after the fact. And so you're going to probably hear us in the opposition increasingly in a very respectful, very constructive manner, express to government what we're hearing from our constituents, whether it's that home builder who called me yesterday who said, I am about to move forward with phase 3 of my project. It's 29 lots. I need the financing to put the services in. He's never had a problem with this ever before. This is a guy who's got great credit by all accounts, and his bank sent him a letter yesterday morning saying, we are not able to advance the loan for this next project because the BC government hasn't yet provided a clear signal as to when and how the economy will reopen, how society will reopen. So I think we need to continue to trust the input and the advice of Bonnie Henry and her public health colleagues for sure. We want to reopen society in a safe and responsible manner. But we do need a plan from government. We do need the government to step up now and with its judgment begin to implement components of that plan to reopen society and reopen the economy. And to the extent that the government continues to announce programs, continues to spend taxpayers' dollars, we continue to hear concerns about gaps and challenges of people falling through the cracks, not to mention the progress that we want to see on the economy and a focus on reopening the economy. We're going to continue to ask tougher and sharper questions, I think, all the while respecting the ongoing and very important work of the public health community to keep British Columbians safe.
Well, Todd, if you ever need any advice on opposition, my party is an expert at that. They've spent many years honing their skills in opposition. So I wanted to move on to something you mentioned at the beginning, which is the situation. The other portfolio part of your critic role is that of municipalities. We've seen Vancouver Mayor Kennedy Stewart say that the city could go bust. We've seen other municipalities say that they're facing severe financial pitfalls due to the likelihood of a lot of people not being able to pay their property tax. What does the BC Liberal Party feel should be done about municipalities?
Well, there's two things that I would touch on that question. One is there is no question that local governments are doing as much heavy lifting as they possibly can with their budgets. They are, for the most part, across British Columbia, they have reduced their costs. They have unfortunately had to engage in some temporary layoffs, typically for seasonal workers and part-time positions and positions that might have been in a rec center or some type of public facility that's now temporarily closed. I've talked to mayors and councillors all over the province who have passed bylaws to provide the authorization to access their contingency reserves if they need to. Some of them have gone ahead and have done that. Others, recognizing the impact of property tax increases on the pocketbooks of British Columbians, have deferred increases in utility fees and property taxes. Some have moved out the imposition of penalties and interest on the non-payment of property taxes for a number of months, some even to the end of the year. So they're all doing their best to try and grapple with the very real impacts to communities. Remember that cash flow is important there too. The local governments have very limited sources of revenue. They have a legislated requirement to balance their budget, and many of the mayors and councillors I talk to have a deep respect for their local taxpayer and want to minimize the increase in taxes, particularly during COVID. What's interesting is neither the provincial or the federal governments have really stepped up in a big way, and maybe they're playing chicken with one another to see who does it first. But neither of them have really stepped up to the plate with a program of supports directly focused on local governments, and the longer this goes on, the more important that is going to be. The other piece I would touch on would be TransLink in Metro Vancouver and BC Transit across the rest of the province. When you hear of a 75% reduction in service, when you hear of an equivalent reduction in the fare box, and what is it, $75 million a month that I think TransLink is losing at the moment. if we want to ensure we've got viable transit there for us well into the future, not just when this pandemic is over, but well into the future, provincial and federal governments need to get off their butts and step up to the plate and invest in BC Transit and TransLink in the Lower Mainland. So that's the other major piece that I'm hearing daily from local governments right across the province.
So Todd, one of the things I've been talking about publicly is back in, I think it was 0809 when we had the previous recession, I think it was your government, BC Liberal government, that implemented some changes to the tax deferral program, which allowed for families that were facing financial hardship to access that program. Any thoughts about putting forward some constructive ideas like that to the government to consider? Because right now, there are a lot of families that are looking at paying these property taxes, and the cities need the money, and the families are having a challenge paying those property taxes. Any thought about making recommendations to the provincial government to reinstate that and perhaps provide the same interest rate that they provide to seniors, which is, I think the interest rate is about 1.9%. So there's no deferral or difference between families and seniors, something that the Liberals are considering or recommending to the government?
Absolutely. There's a few things going on here. As you know well, property taxes are due on the first bank holiday after July 1st, right? So for this year, it's July 2nd. There have been lots of calls for local governments to defer property taxes. They technically can't do that without the legislative authority to do so. And the act that they're governed by is pretty rigid. But as I said earlier, what local governments can do, and many of them are, is they are deferring the payment of interest and penalties that begin to come into play if a homeowner is late in paying their property taxes on that July 2nd deadline. So that's happening. What I also think is worthy of consideration, and many mayors have suggested this to me as well, and we're advancing it to the BC government, is there are other things that the province could do to actually step up and help alleviate the property tax challenge here, all the while keeping everybody whole. One thing that the province could do, as you've pointed out, is to expand the property deferment program. At the moment, you have to be 55 years or older, or a surviving spouse, or a person with a disability. Why not look at expanding that to include people that are under significant financial distress as a result of COVID-19? I think that's a very worthy idea for consideration. The other piece that could make a big difference. Remember that the number one cost in most municipalities, when you set aside the staffing costs in a city hall itself, is policing and fire and emergency response. One thing that the province could do is it could look at deferring payment or forgiving a portion of payment of say policing costs. That would represent a very significant financial. We would provide significant financial breathing space for those municipalities in question. Municipalities under 15,000 population don't pay for their policing, but over 15,000 population they do on a graduated scale. So that's again something else very practical that the province could do, and it's among the ideas that I think are very worthy of consideration.
Todd, there's so many different questions we could ask you on COVID-19, but sort of moving forward, as we tape this on Friday for publication on Monday, we hear the province will announce its kind of recovery plan of returning BC's economy slowly back, opening stores and things. What do the Liberals advise on how to proceed that way?
Well, obviously, first and foremost, to the center of the plan, and we fully expect that this will be the case, but in the center of the plan needs to be the advice and ongoing recommendations of the public health community, no question. But we'll be also looking for whether or not the government is incorporating into its thinking and its planning the advice from a broad range of experts. We'll want to see people that have real depth in understanding in the economy, small business folks, people that understand what it's going to take to attract investment to British Columbia. Look, at the end of the day, there cannot be an economic recovery unless people are looked after in the immediate term. There cannot be an economic recovery if we don't get small businesses off their knees and onto their feet. There cannot be a recovery if we're not ensuring that the education and the training pieces are there for British Columbians. And there has to be a plan for, as I said, attracting investment. That might mean reducing some taxes. That might mean looking at some creative ways to reduce red tape and regulation and so forth. But if we don't get small business up and if we don't attract investment to this province, it's going to be awfully difficult to envision a speedy recovery through this, or a recovery that at least gets people back working and able to pay their own bills. And look, at the end of the day, human beings are social creatures. We can't be in self-isolation for forever or for a very long period of time. Not that Dr. Bonnie Henry has said that, but we've got to come out of this plan next week with a kind of a dual approach, one that respects the safe and responsible reopening from a health perspective, but also recognizes there is going to have to be a very thoughtful and significant plan to bring our industries back, bring small business back, and get people into jobs.
Todd, in the remaining time we have, I would be remiss if I didn't switch topics a bit. I know we've got a lot to talk with you about COVID, but there are other issues, believe it or not, that British Columbians are actually grappling with. And one of those is strata insurance. I know you have brought forward a private members bill. I know you've been very vocal on the concerns and expressing those concerns on behalf of countless British Columbians that are facing astronomical increases to their strata insurance. That issue was really beginning to ramp up and make the 6 o'clock news before COVID pandemic hit, but it's still there. It hasn't gone away. What's happening behind the scenes to help these families, these people who own these condos, who are facing costs that I can only imagine in a time of pandemic, like Bill? I know Bill's strata insurance are going up, and the same with us as well, our family. A lot of families I know are dealing with that. What are the BC Liberals proposing, and is it workable, and is there any progress report on that?
Sure. Look, there's 30,000 strata corporations in British Columbia, fully 50% of the residents of Metro Vancouver. So, half of the 2.7 million people in your neck of the woods live in some form of a strata. And strata insurance costs are skyrocketing. And this began to emerge as an issue sort of late in the fall of last year, and really ramped up over the holiday period and into 2020. We're still hearing stories. I get emails daily from different strata corporation councils, from individual strata owners in every community around the province. Still reflecting stories of one this morning, a 400% increase in the annual insurance premium for a building that's only 10 years old in Kelowna, and no rationale, no record of significant water damage claim recently or anything else. Just a huge increase in the insurance premium. Well, that also includes a significant increase in the deductibles, which means that the monthly fees that strata owners like the two of you have to pay are going up in some cases by $100, $200. I've even heard $500 a month. Not to mention one-time assessments to do whatever work needs to be done. One-time assessment to actually pay the bill in the immediate term. So big problem. I did propose a private members bill. It was very modest. The three items in the bill were really about streamlining some sections of the Strata Property Act to better clarify for example, who's responsible for what between the strata owner and the strata corporation, and make sure that the insurance coverages are much more clarified as a result. We also called for a water damage prevention program. In the context of all of the money that has been announced and all of the very worthy programs up to this point, I'm shocked that the BC government has not announced some help for strata owners, even if it was just in the form of a water damage prevention program or something that would begin a process of applying some downward pressure on strata insurance costs. So we're going to have a lot more to say about this. This is again one of those issues that didn't, whether there was COVID or not, it's a huge issue impacting a lot of people. We're going to continue to refine our approach to it, and we'll have more details to share in the coming weeks.
Well, if Daniel and I can agree on this one, Todd, we're hoping that you and Minister Selina Robinson can come into agreement very quickly because, in all seriousness, it is a cross-partisan real challenge for British Columbia. Todd, I just really want to thank you for joining us on BC Poli Talk today, taking the time out, and we wish you the best of luck with your constituency work and serving the constituents in your riding in Kamloops.
Well, thank you very much, Bill and Daniel, and it was a real pleasure to speak with both of you today, and I hope you and everyone watching and listening stays well as we get through this COVID pandemic. We're going to get through it. We're going to get through it together, but let's be smart out there, and all the best to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Todd Stone, the MLA for Kamloops South Thompson, and we'll be right back.
BC Poli Talk thanks Harbour Air for supporting the show. It's through sponsorship and viewer support that we get to produce this show.
So, Bill, that was an interesting discussion with Todd Stone, MLA for Kamloops South Thompson, a former leadership candidate for the BC Liberal Party, one of the younger folks within the caucus. Very articulate fellow, knows his file. He's very passionate about things like municipal affairs and housing. He kind of gave us a little bit of a sneak peek, a little bit into some of, I think, the strategy that's going to be coming out in the coming weeks. I think two things that caught my attention. One was the fact that I think they're going to focus a lot on the economy. And I think that is where the public is likely going to give them the most wide berth in terms of being able to criticize. So I think that you're going to see a lot more and hear a lot more from the BC Liberals over the coming months, just based on his comment, as well as just the whole pivot that they're going to have to do as a caucus in terms of getting out of essentially working all collaboratively to moving more into a little bit of an area of public criticism. So it'll be fascinating to watch that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think what we're going to see with the opposition, I mean, really the Green Party is also an opposition party, even though they are propping the government up currently. But I think you're going to see that they will focus on areas where the government is seen to be or is, in fact, deficient in the COVID-19 response and the economic recovery response, and sort of lay back on other things. So they're going to have to really gauge the public opinion and public mood because, as you've said, and we said in the interview, there's no tolerance of the public right now for bashing the other parties or bashing the government. That is just not going to, and I don't think that's going to change in the immediate future. But I think there is room for the opposition to criticize the government where they feel measures that are taken are not sufficient. We saw a bit of that today in a very mild form.
Yeah, and I was pleased to hear his comments. I know he's got that private members bill on the strata insurance, and it's something you and I have chatted about on a number of occasions. It is unfortunate that due to the circumstances with the pandemic, that so many issues have kind of fallen off the radar, but so many people are still being impacted. And although I think he admitted there that his private members bill isn't going to solve everything, it is kind of a step, I think, forward. But we did hear the Minister of Finance a few weeks ago stand up in the House and say that there is work being done on this, but really has gone silent, and as have, I'm sure, a number of issues kind of not made it on the top of the radar.
Well, as you and I know, anything that isn't urgent COVID-19 just has to be put on the back burner temporarily. But how long is temporarily? And I agree with you. I think that's one of the issues, and you and I are both affected by it, as we've said before. But there are many other issues of significant importance to British Columbians that are not happening. And, there's all sorts of things which we'll hopefully get into in the next few shows before we close for the season. But, we're talking elective surgeries. People just need medical procedures, dental procedures that have all been stalled temporarily. Dry cleaning. I can't get my dry cleaning. When can I get my dry cleaning back? So I can put on a different shirt and suit for the show. So.
Yeah, and what's been interesting too, Bill, is I think Dr. Henry raised it this week. It'll be last week now when people get to see this show. But she was raising the whole issue of so many businesses that have actually closed voluntarily. Dr. Henry actually has not closed them, but they're sitting empty and they're not sure what to do to reopen. And it'll be critical for the government and Dr. Henry to get out there and to begin discussing what it'll take to reopen that economy, even in places that don't necessarily need to be closed due to government regulation. You also hit on another, I think, critical point, and that is around the issue of the acute care elective surgeries that have been canceled, where I think now well over 20,000 surgeries have been canceled. There's been articles now starting to come out in the paper where people are saying my spouse has died because they couldn't get access to the appropriate medical treatment during COVID. So, that's going to start emerging now. We're going to start seeing people who are saying, let's go, let's move and let's get on this. And the government's handling of that second phase of this COVID crisis is going to be absolutely critical to their reelection next year.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's where we'll see the rubber hit the road in terms of more opposition. I think Todd Stone hinted at that at least. And so it'll be a fascinating period coming up, because I think getting back to economic recovery mode is a bigger challenge for the NDP government. I think it'll be more challenging. There'll be more criticism. We're going to see the business community, which has been fairly quiet and supportive of the government, and rightly so, in my view, given the measures that have been taken and the way we've come through this. But, everyone will be in a rush to get back to business, start making money, start paying rent and buying things. And I think that will be even more challenging for the government as a whole, less on the shoulders of Bonnie Henry and Adrian Dix and more on the entire government.
Bill Tillman, it has been a pleasure to be with you again this week. I look forward to be back next week with another next guest. It seems like it's all COVID these days, but eventually we're going to get to other topics, I'm sure, before the season's over.
Thanks, Daniel, and stay safe, everybody.
Stay safe. See you soon.
And remember, you can find everything at our website, bcpolitalk.ca. You can also chase us down on Spotify and iTunes for podcasts. You can find us on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook and find links there. You can go to YouTube and see the show.